was a subsect of Hungarians in Transylvania who practiced such an extreme form of Unitarianism, they basically adopted Judaism in secret for hundreds of years. Unitarianism first exploded in Transylvania with a preacher named Ferenc David founding the church there in 1568. And the Prince of Transylvania adopted Unitarianism, becoming the first Unitarian leader shortly thereafter. But David's views grew more and more radical, and he was eventually rejected by the rest of the Unitarians, who would wind up being persecuted by subsequent Catholic rulers. One subsect of the most radical Unitarians adopted a mix of Christianity and Judaism, and those were called the Székely Sabbatarians. Despite many laws outlawing Sabbatarians and intense persecution, the sect grew and grew to as many as 20,000, attracting ethnic Hungarian converts from all classes. Waves of persecution continued, and they even wrote a letter at one point to the Ottomans, pleading for a total takeover, hoping that they might be more tolerated by Muslim leaders than by Catholic leaders. At first, the group's theology was confusing and complex, embracing the Sabbath and some Jewish holidays, but not others. They also embraced some Mosaic laws, keeping mostly kosher, but not practicing circumcision. But Szymon Pécsi, an influential Unitarian who later led the Sabbatarians, brought the practices of this group much closer to Jewish traditions. And Sabbatarianism would eventually become much more similar to Judaism over time. Eventually, Pécsi was actually considered an important contributor to Jewish scholarship in Europe, despite not being born Jewish and practicing this obscure Unitarian sect, translating many Hebrew works into Hungarian that hadn't been translated into any other language even hundreds of years after his death. After Transylvania came into Austrian control in 1717, most Sabbatarians emigrated to Turkey, but some, especially in the village of Bozodoifalu, remained. While much of this community ostensibly converted to Catholicism, it's well known that they practiced Sabbatarianism in secrecy for hundreds of years afterward. And they exclusively gave their children Jewish names, they would conduct a private Jewish marriage ceremony immediately after conducting a public Christian one, and women would often cut their hair after marriage too. In fact, marriage to Christians was at one point forbidden, but marriage to Jews was allowed. As time passed, many Sabbatarians just did the logical thing and went ahead and converted to Judaism. But still, this unique religious community remained, even inspiring a famous Hungarian novel, and their poetry has been considered quite significant in the history of Hungarian literature too. The rest of their history is quite tragic. In 1941, they were actually exempted from the first Hungarian anti-Jewish laws. But by 1944, virtually all Sabbatarians who remained were deported and in Auschwitz. There's so much to say about this fascinating community, too much for one TikTok, but they're one of the many groups that makes the religious history of Transylvania so fascinating.